All right, so tell me a little bit about Empower You Advocacy. How did it come about?
Helene, you want to take the lead or you want me to?
Well, you want to start and I'll join in after you.
Sounds great. So, yeah, great question. So, how did it get started? So this is Sarah speaking. I have a background as an education specialist, so I have um, a special education teaching credential, and I had the opportunity to work in public schools as an education specialist for about 8 years. And over time, first of all, I really loved my job. I love teaching, in pretty much every component of my job, except I think even more so after the pandemic, I started to notice a discrepancy in the quality of education that children with disabilities were receiving. Um, and a lot of that had to do with parents' knowledge of the um, special education process. So when we're talking, if we're using a lot of acronyms, feel free to ask us to explain what those mean or if we use jargon. So an IEP, that's a individualized education program. So that is essentially a plan that in special education children receive to help them make progress educationally. So I wrote a lot of IEPs in my career, and the whole special education process is governed by all these different laws. There's a lot of technical jargon. It's very confusing. So parents that were well informed about the process tended to get better educational outcomes for their children compared to parents that didn't have understanding of the process. In addition to that, the districts only had so much funding available to them. So a lot of times decisions were made for children for their education based on funding rather than what was best for the child. So one of the parts of my job I really enjoyed was coaching and educating parents on the things they could ask for that maybe weren't readily advertised. And which was kind of a conflict of interest because, technically I was working for the school district. And I just, over time, I was like, I want to make a difference in a different way in the lives of children with disabilities by empowering families to be able to advocate for their for their children to get the educational supports that they need to thrive. Because it all starts when they're young. We know early intervention is so important to later outcomes, and so kind of attacking it at that level will set them up for a better quality of life later on.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I'm Helene Linsky, and Sarah and I worked in the school district and we worked together. And she had a caseload, and I worked with all the students with IEPs on her caseload, providing interventions and helping these students make progress on their goals. And Sarah and I, we thought we were the dream team. We had the same philosophy. We really believed in wholeheartedly the success for each child is very individualized. So I left the school district earlier. While I left, we started toying with this idea of how can we make the biggest difference. And within a year's time, Empower You Advocacy was born. Now, Sarah has a lot of the technical or experience with, writing IEPs, running IEP meetings, but I have more of the personal experience. I have two boys. My youngest son was on an IEP from the age of 3 through high school. So I've sat in all of those IEP meetings at the parent end of it. And my son now, actually, in 2 weeks' time, will be graduating college on May 17th. So I've come a long way with him, and it was a long journey. But Sarah and I founded this company to try to help and support as many families as possible in the Orange County area.
Hmm. Yeah, that's nice. I'm familiar with the whole IEP system since I
Mhm.
was in a lot of those IEP meetings throughout my middle school, elementary school, high school. Even my mother was even in every one of those meetings, so it can be stressful being in those meetings, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Absolutely. They
Yeah.
are not easy and they're very hard to understand. And
Yeah.
even with educational background, and even I thought going into my own son's IEP, I thought I had a leg up. And
Hmm.
I might have, but I still was out of my realm. And it took, we understand that it's a very confusing process, and we're here to help make that confusing process more manageable, as well as Sarah and I have a very collaborative approach to our business. A lot of, and that could work for some people and not work for others, but we have sat on the other side of the table and we know how hard educators work and we know how difficult the process is. And how, like Sarah mentioned earlier, how a lot of things are out of their control. But we do believe that a collaborative approach and trying to leave the IEP team better than when we first begin with it is our goal as well.
Hmm. My next question is, what sorts of services do you provide at Empower You Advocacy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It really depends on the needs of our families. So we really try to cater and individualize our services. But some of the services that we do provide, Helene can explain as to kind of the process once we receive um, a client, intake a client, what that looks like initially.
Sure. So we do offer a 30-minute complimentary consultation. And during that time, a parent would sign up for it. They would fill out a questionnaire, which would give us background on the child and possibly their last IEP. So we can really maximize that 30 minutes to get to the nuts and bolts of what the issues are. And then services from there, we always start with a record review where we ask the families for the last few years of records, whether it be assessments, IEPs, outside evaluators, documents, report cards, anything they think will give us the best picture, because we're trying to put this puzzle together of this wonderful individualized child, and we want to get as much information as possible. And we look that over, and then we provide our sort of our results, but also our recommendations. And clients or families can at that point say, thank you very much, we got it from here. Or they can use our services throughout their son or daughter's IEP journey, which could be attending IEP meetings or writing letters to the IEP team on their behalf. It could be going into the schools and collecting data on the IEP goals for their child. We can be full service or we can just do the first step. It really depends on the family's needs.
Hmm. My next question, I guess, is, what sorts of stakeholders do you guys work with at Empower You Advocacy? I'm assuming it's the clients that you guys take in every day, but there is more.
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
it is more.
Yeah, we love networking with other professionals in our community. Um, and so I don't know, for me, that's been something I've really enjoyed. Getting to see kind of different lenses and also being able to connect people with resources that they need, because obviously we can't provide everything. Um, so, I think initially at the beginning of building our business, one of the ways that we got to know other professionals in our community, and when I say other professionals, I mean like primarily service providers, so like speech language pathologists, educational psychologists, maybe like ABA services, that sort of thing.
Occupational therapists.
Yeah. And even like support groups, like autism support groups, Down syndrome support groups, different communities like that. We would send out a bunch of emails and like make a bunch of phone calls, like cold calls, and basically introduce ourselves to these different people. And made a lot of connections that way, which has been really awesome because I think we're at a point now where we can, if we have a client, let's say they need outside speech or something outside of the school, we can connect them with somebody that we know, that we've gotten to know professionally, that we trust is going to do a good job and be a good fit for our client. So we love or saying, okay, there's this support group that you can go to, because it's oftentimes difficult for parents to, it can be an isolating situation for a parent to have a child with, let's say, a severe disability and feel like they're alone. So sometimes having them network with other people in the disability community can be very helpful for the parents, the child, and the whole family.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what impact does your organization have on the disability community as a whole? Like, what have you heard from people, who have received your services?
Yeah, so we hope to affect change for the families that we serve two different ways, primarily. First of all, we equip parents, um, and we equip them by educating them, by modeling for them, to advocate for their child's needs. And then, depending on the age of the child, I was always big on this as an education specialist too. Like we want, depending on um the level of the child, like their functioning and so forth, we want to equip that child to be able to advocate for their own needs. Um, so that's something that we're big on, because we believe that's really important as they transition into adulthood as well. And then we also help children with disabilities receive appropriate educational supports, again, in order to equip them to become functioning members of society and improve their quality of life. And then lastly, we also offer free webinars to the community to educate parents on the special education process and provide advocacy tips for parents.
Mm-hmm. All right. My last question, I guess, in this conversation is, I know that in society there's a lot of stigma, ableism, with regards to the disability community. So I'm wondering how you guys as an organization tackle that. How do you guys sort of create that inclusive, welcoming space for not just individuals with disabilities, but parents, and other members involved in the process?
I think there's just so much misinformation out there, and I think a lot of times people don't even realize that they have biases when it comes to their perspectives on people with disabilities. So we seek to educate professionals in the school setting
Mhm.
too, because um, as you may or may not know, the IEP, these meetings that children in special education, the IEP meetings must be held at least once a year, and they have certain required team members from the school. So, for example, each team has to have a general education teacher at those meetings. Um, and general education teachers, most students on IEPs are in the general education setting primarily. But general education teachers during their credential program, they might get like maybe one class on teaching children with disabilities. So they're not really equipped or trained a lot of times um, to teach those children in a way that works for them, or to really even understand, um, how different disabilities can manifest, or the difference between like this child is being defiant and difficult versus, oh, this child has ADHD, they can't regulate, they're hyper because of something that is beyond their control. And it can be tricky in meetings because, we want to respect that everybody at the table is a professional, but then we also seek to educate them if they don't understand, certain things. Um, and I think we really try to adopt a strength-based approach when it comes to helping IEP teams, or even helping our clients see
Mhm.
the strengths of their children, as opposed to focusing on the disability, focus on the ability, um, focus on the interests. Let's see how we can weave that into the child's education plan so that we can really take the whole child into account, um and honor that your child's multifaceted. And and I know it's gone both ways in the disability community, but like when I went to my credential program as a special ed teacher, like they used to talk about like people first language, like you don't say, um
Mhm.
autistic child, which that goes back and forth. But like, I think the point being, like, you would say like person with cerebral palsy instead of,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? With the idea behind that being like person first, right? Like they're a person first, and then this is like a part of their lives, but let's not define them solely by that. Um, so, and I mean, another thing, like we believe in presuming competence for all children with disabilities and holding them to high but reasonable expectations. I think there's a tendency in the education community to think that, okay, because a child maybe they have autism and they're nonverbal, and you're thinking, okay, they're not intelligent because they can't speak, um, but maybe they just have expressive communication deficits, and maybe they need a support like an AAC device, which is like a device that's used to communicate, to so we can get into their brain and see what they're really capable of. Let's
Mm.
equip them to show, their true potential. Um, I mean, we really try to honor neurodiversity by teaching others to take a holistic view of the whole child. That's really like important to us, and teaching that different is not bad, right? And people with disabilities add intrinsic value to the community, and they have so much to offer when they are given the right opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. It's like someone born without a partial limb, or someone with a physical disability.
Mhm.
It's the assumption that it's those biases, right? Of like, oh, this person can't do this, or this person needs something, when in fact they don't. Like they just don't have. They have those assumptions that aren't necessarily accurate, but
Right.
Absolutely.
yeah, but
Right.
it's like training and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like a paradigm shift. Like it's
Yeah.
like, you thought you thought everything you believed. It's like, wait a second, maybe I'm wrong about this, which can be hard for some people. But I
Yeah,
mean
it
that
is.
goes for all kinds of disabilities, like physical disabilities that can be seen, as in, as well as disabilities that cannot be seen, which are difficult in a uniquely different way, like autism, for example, like mental health issues, like those people have disabilities as well. So, and I think one more thing, I'm really passionate about this. Um, I used to have a professor that specialized in autism that used to say, you've met one child with autism, then you've met one child with autism. Um, and I think it goes for any kind of disability. You've met one people with XYZ, then that's one person. And just because this person with a disability and now you've met a new person with the same disability, they're not the same person.
Who is?
Hmm.
No two people are the same. And that is definitely a prejudice that goes along with it, that we're trying to, especially for educators, because like Sarah mentioned, but for everyone. For in the communities, why we do, you know, free-based webinars, that we
Yeah.
reach out to the regional center, because
Yeah.
we know we're privileged to be in this position, and we want to be able to give as much information as we can to the public and to our community, as well as within each school that we work with, to be able to help educate those people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.